The helicopter came in low over the rice paddies, engines screaming, and inside it, 56 men checked their weapons for the last time. None of them knew yet that the camp below them was empty. They had trained for this moment for months, practiced it at night, over and over, on a replica built to the exact dimensions of the real thing. Every wall, every guard tower, every distance between buildings had been rehearsed so many times that some of the men could have run the mission blindfolded. Tonight, that training was about to be tested for real, 23 miles west of Hanoi, deep inside the most heavily defended airspace in the world. Their target was a prison camp called Son Tay. Inside it, American intelligence believed, were dozens of U.S. servicemen who had been captured and held for years. Some had been prisoners since the early 1960s. Families back home had no idea if their sons and husbands were even still alive. This raid was meant to bring some of them home. It had taken nearly a year to plan.
Photographs from spy satellites had been studied inch by inch. A tabletop model of the camp had been built so planners could examine it from every angle. The team selected for the mission, all volunteers from Army Special Forces, didn't know their real target until weeks into training. They only knew it was dangerous and that failure wasn't really an option they were allowed to consider. Brigadier General Leroy Manor commanded the operation from above. Colonel Arthur Bull Simons, already something of a legend among Special Forces, served as his deputy and flew in with the support element. Lieutenant Colonel Elliot Bud Sidnor led the security group that would seal off the area. And leading the assault itself was a small, hand-picked team whose job was the most dangerous of all. Get inside the compound first and get to the prisoners before the guards could kill them.
The plan called for one helicopter to do something almost unheard of. Instead of landing outside the walls, it would crash land directly inside the prison courtyard, dropping the assault team right on top of the guards before they had time to react. It was reckless by any normal standard. It was also, the planners believed, the only way to save lives once the shooting started. At 2:18 in the morning on November 21st, 1970, that helicopter came down inside the walls of Son Tay. The assault team spilled out through the smoke and dust, opening fire on the guard towers within seconds. Explosions ripped through the compound as demolition charges tore open walls. Tracer fire cut across the courtyard. For men who had rehearsed this exact sequence dozens of times in the dark fields of Florida, the chaos felt almost familiar. They moved fast, clearing buildings, searching for the cells where the prisoners were supposed to be held. But something had already gone wrong 200 yards away.
Another helicopter, carrying the security element under Sidnor, had missed its landing zone. Instead of setting down beside Son Tay, it touched down at a walled compound nearly identical in size and shape, several hundred yards to the south. The men inside realized their mistake almost immediately, but not before a fierce firefight broke out. It later became clear the compound wasn't a school, as some had guessed. It was housing foreign military personnel, and the exchange of gunfire there turned out to be some of the most intense combat of the entire operation. The misplaced landing threatened to unravel the mission's timing. Every second on the ground was a second closer to North Vietnamese reinforcements arriving. Every second was a second closer to surface-to-air missile crews locking onto the aircraft still circling overhead. Sidnor made a fast decision, pulling his men back into formation and pushing them toward the correct target on foot, cutting through the confusion instead of freezing inside it.
Back inside Son Tay itself, the assault leader worked through the compound with brutal efficiency. Guards who resisted were killed. Cell block doors were blown open one after another, and every single one of them was empty. At first, it seemed impossible. The intelligence had been so precise. The layout matched exactly what the planners expected. But cell after cell revealed nothing except old bedding and bare walls. 10 minutes into the raid, the words went out over the radio. Negative items. Items was the code word for prisoners. Negative items meant there weren't any. For a mission built entirely around one goal,
It was the worst possible message anyone could have sent. Somewhere above the compound, listening to that transmission, Bull Simons could hardly believe it. He ordered a full check of the cells himself, refusing to accept it until he'd seen it with his own eyes. There was nothing to find. The prisoners the raiders had trained for months to save simply weren't there. Now the mission shifted in an instant from rescue to withdrawal. Every second the team spent standing in an empty prison camp was a second wasted under enemy fire, in a country where American losses could turn a bold operation into a diplomatic catastrophe. Sydnor gave the order to pull out. The team destroyed the crashed helicopter with a timed charge so it couldn't be salvaged for propaganda, then moved fast toward the extraction point. Overhead, the air war around them had grown far more dangerous than anyone expected. North Vietnamese radar crews had finally located the strike aircraft supporting the raid, and surface-to-air missiles began streaking up into the night sky. Fighter pilots scrambled to draw fire away from the extraction helicopters. For a few tense minutes, the fate of 56 men on the ground depended on pilots fighting an entirely separate battle thousands of feet above them. Every American who had gone in came out. Only one man suffered a serious injury, a broken ankle sustained during the initial helicopter landing. Considering the ferocity of the operation, it was an extraordinary outcome. And yet it felt, to almost everyone involved, like a devastating failure. The prisoners had been moved months earlier, in the summer of 1970, after North Vietnamese officials grew concerned about flooding near the camp. American intelligence had no way of knowing. Satellite photographs can show buildings and guard patterns. They cannot show which cells are occupied. When news of the raid became public, reactions split sharply. Some questioned how such a meticulously planned mission could have targeted an empty camp. Others focused on what the operation proved was possible, that American forces could strike deep inside North Vietnam, hit a precise target, and bring every single man home alive. But the raid's real impact wouldn't be understood for years, and it had almost nothing to do with Son Tay itself. Word of the attack terrified North Vietnamese officials responsible for holding American prisoners. Camps scattered in small, isolated locations suddenly looked vulnerable to another strike. Within weeks, prisoners who had spent years in solitary confinement in scattered camps across the countryside found themselves being moved and consolidated into larger, more centralized facilities in Hanoi itself. For prisoners who had endured years of isolation, that consolidation changed everything. Men who hadn't seen another American in years suddenly found themselves in shared cells. Communication between prisoners, long forbidden and brutally punished, became far harder for guards to prevent once hundreds of men were held together. Morale, by nearly every account from survivors, improved dramatically. None of the prisoners came home that November. It would take almost 3 more years and a formal peace agreement before that happened. But many of the men who eventually did return later said the raid had changed their daily existence in ways the American public wouldn't learn about until much later. The mission's planners had built something extraordinary: flawless timing, exceptional intelligence, a level of coordination between air and ground forces that special operations units would study for decades afterward. What they couldn't control was the one variable that mattered most. The prisoners simply weren't there to save. Whether Son Tay counts as a failure or a quiet, delayed success still depends on who you ask. The camp was empty, but somewhere in Hanoi, in cells that had been silent for years, men who had almost given up hope of anyone even remembering them found themselves, for the first time in a long time, no longer entirely alone.